Hello and welcome to this video. This is the first video in our video series about how to fight e4 like Fabiano Caruana does. And what does he do? He plays e4, e5, the double king pawn opening. Almost, for sure the most popular reply on the top level nowadays. They almost all of the top players have e4, e5 in their repertoire. But then it's a matter of taste, I guess, how they continue against the main lines. Pretty much regardless what you do against the main lines, you also need to have something ready against all the side lines that white can throw at you. And this first video is about two very aggressive side lines that we should know some good replies against. We are dealing with, in this video, the move d4, which is not yet really, that does not yet have an opening name, because the next move after our capture will determine how the game is headed. And the other move that we're going to check is the infamous King's Gambit. The King's Gambit is a very aggressive opening, of course, and something that we need to have some good reply against. So I suggest that we start with the move d4. Okay, against d4, our choice is easy. We will take the pawn. Anything else is just too passive, so we take it. This is a general principle that is basically applying throughout the whole repertoire, and is also something that is not something that I invented or that is pioneered here. If you can take a central pawn in the open games, double king pawn, you should almost always do so. It is a much more passive way to play, for example, to defend the pawn with a move like d6. You rather want to take and open up the game. So here, black takes the pawn, and now white has a choice of moves. I have to emphasize already that after d4, white is struggling for equality. That is just what it is. The same thing we will see with the King's Gambit. The early Gambit continuations really are nothing to be afraid of if you know what you're doing. So d4, e takes d4, what does white do? Probably the main line here is queen takes d4. Which is not a gambit, of course, but it often gets to a very sharp play. So it definitely belongs into this first chapter, Gambits and Attacks. What other moves does white have? One move that is important for us, especially because we play the Petrov against 2 knight f3. A move that is important for us is the move knight f3. Why is that important? Because the normal looking move knight to c6 actually transposes into a Scotch game, which is not bad for black, but totally outside of our repertoire. Okay, you can play knight c6 if you also have that in your repertoire anyway, but I don't think that is even the best move. The best move, I think, is the one that I'm recommending, bishop c5. You can also play bishop b4 check, by the way. That's also quite okay. Bishop b4 check will very likely after c3 be a gambit that black can take. But bishop c5 is, I think, a very strong alternative. There are a couple of reasons why I think that this is good. White now has two basic choices. He can make a real gambit out of this with c3 now or on the next move, or he can just take the pawn. We should look at the gambit first, maybe. That can be started with c3 or bishop c4. It will very likely, it can easily transpose into one another. So if c3, we will take it. And now white can try to sacrifice yet another pawn or recapture on c3. If we look at the double pawn sacrifice first, this is important to remember how to fight against that, because those super aggressive options, they can be tricky if you take absolutely everything. oftentimes it's good to return one pawn and make sure that your development is up to speed. So here the best continuation is to play d5. It's really something that should be remembered. After d5, white will take with the bishop to not block this piece. Bishop takes. And here we simply go with the capture and play knight f6. So compared to the immediate capture, we have given away with d5 a pawn. But that was actually in our favor, because now we simply intend to take the bishop, getting rid of that dangerous piece. And if white moves the bishop, we can easily take on d1. So this is already good for black. White has insufficient compensation here. It is wiser for white to only sacrifice one pawn. That would be knight takes c3. Yeah, here we play d6, bishop c4, and knight f6. It needs to be mentioned that within the open games e4, e5, there are a couple of those pawn sacrifices where d4, c3 is played, and they're all slightly different. Yeah? And here this is a quite favorable version. Why? The main reason is we have not yet played the knight to c6. This is quite favorable for us because with the knight being flexible, we get an additional idea, and I will show what it is with the next couple of quite logical moves. Knight b to d7. This way, we manage to help the knight on f6, so this is not such an annoying pin. With the knight on c6, this pin is hard to break, and very important, we have c6 available that would control d5 quite usefully. This is also a very interesting idea, looking at those two pieces and trying to simplify the position. I don't think that this is enough compensation for white. White is not in terrible shape. He's got every piece out, and this is never completely, that should never be totally underestimated, but it's not enough for a pawn. This pawn sacrifice, I think, all in all, is not very dangerous. Another way to get to that pawn sacrifice is the move bishop to c4 at this point. We go d6, and we are ready against c3 to transpose. Like this, we would get exactly the same variation. Yeah, and after d6, white will probably now play c3 or take on d4. We have to examine, of course, if white takes on d4. I think this is probably the most natural move. We go knight f6 to attack the e4 pawn. White castles or plays knight c3. If you castle, you also castle. You don't take on e4, that would be too dangerous. But this is a very logical sequence of moves. And again, knight b d7, we don't need to allow a trade of the knight on d4. Yeah, now we have easy moves. Yeah, we have knight e5 possibly, rook e8, and I think black has no problem at all. I don't think black is better, that would be a bit too much, but we are very comfortable. White actually has to be a little bit alert because this whole situation here is a little bit unstable. Knight e5, bishop g4, those moves can be tricky to meet. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. This is quite important to remember, because if you don't play like I suggested here, you can easily transpose into a scotch, and that is not the best. One thing we need to check, the immediate capture on d4 instead of bishop c4 first, because in this case we are actually even more comfortable. If you go d6, you can get something similar to what we looked at earlier with bishop c4, but you can even castle, and this is more comfortable because our direct play with rook e8 is actually quite dangerous. We have pressure on that pawn. Note that the natural move bishop d3 is not possible for white. That is very important. If he could play bishop d3, it would speed up his development, but that's not possible due to the pressure on the knight. This is a very rare line on any sort of higher level. So I only found one a master level game that went like this. And here black is quite comfortable. It's just a very good version of a scotch. Here you can actually play knight c6 if you like. The pressure that black has on the center It's just very annoying. In that game that I mentioned, that's the game between Grandmaster Illingworth and International Master Kovac in Budapest 2011, they played knight b3, bishop b4, castles, and now black took on c3. We see that black's pawn structure is already excellent. And now I think black played very nicely h6. That is better than taking on e4 immediately, because now if white does not want to take on f6, he only has bishop h4, and then the capture is even more powerful than the move before, because the bishop is hanging. That is quite nice, winning a tempo. So white decided to take, and then they got to this position where black is obviously very comfortable. We have a perfect structure. The white pawns are exposed and weak, so black is just comfortably better here. The move d4 and then knight f3, this is important to know because of the transpositional tricks, but if you play bishop c5, I think you are in very good shape. White also can play in Gambit style with the immediate move c3, the Danish Gambit. Here I have to mention that this never really got popular on the master level or at the master level, because black very easily equalizes with d5. This has been known since the days of Capablanca, and it is a very convenient way to play if you don't want to learn much theory or if you don't want to risk anything. In this particular move order, however, black can play for more than just being equal, which d5 accomplishes. You can play the move queen to e7, and this is what I suggest. I never knew of this move since a couple of years ago when that was recommended in a book by Larry Kaufman. And I was really surprised, like, what is that? And it's very strong, actually. It looks ugly, this queen move, it blocks this bishop, but concrete beats abstract. We attack the pawn on e4. How does white keep that? This is the big problem. White has to make a full pawn sacrifice out of this, of the e4 pawn. And that is actually very difficult to justify. White has tried some moves here, but nothing really works, let's say. The easiest one to refute basically is bishop d3. We just go d5. And white is in trouble. How is he going to play that now? We're just attacking this, and it's pretty much impossible to keep the pawn. Black is in excellent shape. Somewhat better in comparison is queen takes d4. It's still not great, but it's a little bit better than bishop d3. Here we just play knight f6 to develop, and then we go with d5. And use this pinning situation on the e-file. Here white is already clearly worse. A line to demonstrate is e5, for example, knight to c6, attacking the queen and attacking the pawn. So he has to go bishop to b5, moving that bishop again. And now knight d7 is the strongest continuation, breaking this pin here to attack the queen. And white now is in terrible shape. If he takes on d5, for example, we take on e5, and now we are threatening c6, winning the piece, and we are threatening a bunch of discovered checks. This is a terrible position for white. Probably he will not see move 20 from here. The relatively best line after queen e7, and that tells you something, is c takes d4, after which we grab on e4 with check. And here white has a little bit of development for the pawn, but if we check this, we have two pieces out, he's got two pieces out. The only thing is we will have to lose a bit of time with the queen, but we've gotten the e4 pawn, not an unimportant pawn. That's very important. We win a vital center pawn here, not the a pawn, the h pawn, or something like that. And a little bit of suffering is justified if you can win a big center pawn. Here it will very likely continue knight to f3, and now I suggest to play knight to d5. It's a bit of a tempo loss, but we managed to trade some pieces, and we managed to evacuate the queen conveniently. You can also play queen to e7. That is not a terrible move, like here and here. Just go all the way back and claim that white has nothing to attack. That's also playable, but knight d5 I think is better. Queen d2, we take here, the f-pawn takes, and now we return. The reason why I wanted to insert this is that if you go queen e7 earlier, there is bishop g5. That is not the case anymore. Yeah, now it could continue like this. Bishop b3, castles, castles, and knight c6. And white has pretty decent development, and he's pretty nicely mobilized, but I don't think that this is enough for the pawn. Yeah, you can play d6 quickly, and then this is in play. I think this is an unjustified pawn sacrifice. So if we go back to d4, e4, now we have looked at c3 and knight f3. There's another sacrificial attempt with bishop to c4. Against bishop c4, we should play the move knight to f6 and attack the e4 pawn. This is a very sensible choice, and this is because we have to play this position anyway. We can get it from a different move order. Just want to show you briefly what I'm talking about. The move bishop c4, the bishop's opening, will be featured in the second chapter of this repertoire, where we go knight to f6, and if white plays d4 in this case, we just don't have any other move. Yeah? Really, we don't want to play passively d6 or whatnot. We have to take, and that is exactly the position that we get here, just with a different move order. So back to the position, and bishop c4, knight to f6. Now white most of the time plays the move knight f3. That is by far the best move. If instead e5, we have to know the reply. Very important. In this kind of situation in the open games, you want to play the move d5, and it works perfectly in this particular position. We have a counterattack on the bishop, and black is already for choice. We have to see that he has to lose more time, and there's just no good way to justify the whole thing. For example, bishop b5 check. We just go back, and we are in excellent shape here. White will lose enormous amount of time with this to come. So this is just a bad opening, really. White usually, if he goes for that, has something in mind, and that is the move knight to f3. Playing in full Gambit style, just go for quick development. In this position, white has a choice of moves, and I looked at two moves mostly. The move that I recommend ultimately, this is to take on e4, according to the principle that if you can take a center pawn and you don't see an immediate punishment, you should do it. And I looked at bishop b4 check. This is also a way to try to win a pawn. White will make a gambit out of it with c3. There's another move, however, that makes perfect sense, and that's the move knight c6. I want to mention that this is very often recommended in books, and this is not a bad recommendation at all. The issue with this move is that from here, white has a ton of possibilities that are all quite interesting. This is e5, castles, knight g5. All of that gets highly tactical, and it is a lot of work really to look at this. And our move order here, we don't get that often, is what I'm trying to say. So you would learn lots of theory, and at the end, if white is precise, he can still equalize. Yeah, I mean, note what I'm saying. He can equalize. White has to equalize in all those lines. It's just a struggle already for white. Still, I think that we can pose problems with knight takes e4 as well, and it is very principled. We take the pawn on e4. After this, we have a full pawn to the good already. It's just like we've won the center pawn. What white has is very, very swift development. So let's have a look at this. I should mention that this has a name. That's called the Rusov Gambit. Rusov. Never heard of the person besides that gambit, but he invented it, it seems. So queen d4, and we go back. So we have invested a bit of time with knight f6, knight e4, and back, but it's the big center pawn. Now white usually plays one of two moves, knight c3 or bishop g5. I think those are very logical. White wants to castle queenside, develop as quickly as possible. A move like castling short is just too slow. Yeah, we have an easy development, d5, bishop e7, and so on. Bishop g5 and knight c3 is basically the same thing. My main move that I'm using is knight c3, but I just want to show it leads to the same thing. We go bishop e7, white will develop, knight c6, queen h4, the most aggressive square, and then after d6 we get exactly the same position that we get also if white starts with this move. It just doesn't make a difference. Bishop e7, bishop g5, knight c6. I think this is very logical. d6, long castles. And now, the next couple of moves are actually important and absolutely vital to know, because white has a very strong development. If you play something else, you will very likely end up in trouble. So you should play the recommendation. That is bishop to e6. I think this is a strong option, because we get a little bit of, we get some time back in a way, because white has to react a little bit to this situation. If he takes, that's totally harmless, closing the e file. Black has no problem then. He basically has two choices. He can allow us to take on c4. That I think is the best option. Or he can decide to move the bishop again, which gains us the time that I mentioned. The way to retreat, move it again, would be bishop to d3. This is the most frequently played move in this position. I think, however, that black is in excellent shape here, and this line is one of the reasons why I'm recommending to snatch on e4, because this is very attractive and quite likely to happen. White players don't want to trade here all that much, and bishop d3 is very tempting because it makes short castling impossible. Of course, we cannot castle short. That's a catastrophe with mate here. So what do? We play the move h6. h6 does not threaten right now the bishop because of this situation, but we are basically threatening to threaten. Yeah, if we can solve the situation with the uncovered rook, the bishop here is attacked. So I think the white move is very logical. Rook h to e1, probably the super obvious move. And now my suggestion is to play a6. I know that looks very mysterious, but it is very strong, and we will see shortly why. In some way, white now has reached the optimal setup. What is he supposed to do to improve his position? This is really difficult to say. Yeah? The move king b1, I think, is very logical. It's generally useful, and there's no other really good other waiting move. So let's look at this. King b1. And now the idea comes in play that I mentioned, the idea that fascinated me. And that is that black now plays the shocker king d7. That's a really cool move. If you can play that, you're happy. I actually was able to play it in a blitz game only recently on my channel, my YouTube channel. That was a fun game. You can blitz out those moves. That's fun. Yeah. Okay, king d7. We just step in the middle of the board. But now it gets very concrete. The bishop is now under attack as the rook is covered. So white has to move the bishop. There is no other option. And where to go? Yeah, I think c1 and d2 are the most obvious squares. We can start with bishop d2. Bishop d2 shows another idea of black's setup. Now we can play the move g5, attack the queen, and the queen is really short of squares. Something like that is very easy. Yeah, we just win the queen, or maybe you can play knight e5 and secure the queen for a piece, but we win the game. So queen to a4 looks more logical. Note that the whole fourth rank is covered. Covered. Very nice. So only a4. And now we go b5. This is one reason why we played a6. Preventing a piece coming to b5, but also having this attack in play. Now we're already winning. Where's the queen going? Yeah, queen a3. That's no good. Yeah, you can play d5, for example, and the queen has huge problems. So this is excellent. White can try the sacrifice, of course. We should check that. But now we have a strong option, rook a5. Note that the bishop is blocking the d file. This is important because we need to compare this to bishop to c1. If white goes to c1, we should not play in the way that I described against bishop d2. The reason is that now the d file is open, or let's say, yeah, it's not blocked by the bishop. We should look at this. This is not good because after queen a4, b5, white has the sacrifice, and that is unfortunately a disaster for us. Now the threat knight e5 check is absolutely terrible. Yeah, it's a big difference if the bishop is here on d2. This is, however, not a problem because if we go back to the position here, we don't have to play g5. We have a strong option in knight to d5. Attacking the queen. The queen will move, has to move probably to g3. And now the simple choice is to take and play bishop to f6. Here we can take stock. Black still is a pawn up. We have won a pawn. And if you look at the pawn structure, it's a bit of a disaster for white. Yeah, he has no pawn structure on the queen side anymore. The only thing to, of course, be a bit cautious about is the king position. But currently there is nothing inside. And we have this idea to make the king more secure. So this is completely unsatisfactory for white. A very funny line in some way, but it is not at all unrealistic to get it on the board. I had it on the board just a short while ago in a blitz game. The reason is the whole moves up to this point are extremely natural, and white players don't want to trade here. This is why they play bishop d3. I think the better move, objectively, is rook h2 e1, however, after which we should take on c4. And now we can castle short. This is important. With the bishops traded, castling short is much, much more attractive because the attacking chances are just a lot slimmer for white. A bishop here is always dangerous, and now we have traded this off. I need to mention that white has some compensation for the pawn. We are not just a pawn up, but it is a center pawn, and we don't have any immediate weakness. And also we have a pretty clear idea. I would suggest to go queen to d7, rook a to e8, and bishop d8 to initiate trades on the e file. The thing that you have to be aware of is white now has this burden to show that he has something for the center pawn. We are basically better. Winning is too strong, but we are better. We are good enough materially so that we just can trade. We can just trade down, and white has to avoid trades and keep an initiative, which is difficult to develop. So I think we can be happy with this position. And there are many deviations before that white players can play where they are in severe trouble, as we have seen with this cool king d7 idea. This gambit continuation is not that bad for white if he plays it perfectly, as we have seen here. Okay, so if we go all the way back to d4, we now have looked at, after the capture, we have looked at knight f3, c3, bishop c4, and ultimately we have to check the queen capture, queen takes d4. This is usually called the center game. It's a bit of a weird name. I think it's even weirder in German. In German, this is called Mittelgambit. If you know German, then you know what it means, and I can translate. It means like a gambit in the middle. You can probably guess it even, if you know English, that this is the translation. And it's not even a gambit. White doesn't have has something sacrificed. It would happen often, but not right away. So we go knight c6, unsurprisingly. Gain time on the queen. The queen has to move again, obviously, and we are not unhappy. As you see, white is violating a little bit classic opening principles by moving the queen all that early. So the best move here is probably queen to e3. This is also played most frequently. The reason is that the queen on the e file makes it a bit more difficult for us to play d5. There is also queen to a4. That is a very rare continuation, and it's not that good, really, but we should briefly check why. Because it makes a difference what you play now. You should play the move bishop c5. This is the strongest move, and I wasn't quite aware of that before I researched it for this course. This is strongest because we look at the f2 pawn, and that will gain us a bit of time because white aims for queenside castling. This is about the only idea of this quick queen development, that you can speed up castling to the queen side. And here with the attack on f2, we are hindering white a little bit that way. If white goes for this idea to castle queenside, we play like this. And now knight f6. Yeah, and now you see, if they castle, that is not really a great continuation. f2 is hanging. And we always have bishop d7 as a little bit of a tempo gainer on the queen. White will probably play f3 here to keep the f2 pawn. We castle, white castles long, and now very strong knight to e5. This queen is short of squares. We have a very simple plan now to play a pawn roller on the queen side, and all those pawns are set in motion and will gain time on the queen, which is misplaced on a4. So black is in very good shape, really. The queenside castling plan is almost immediately failing. If white plays knight f3 instead, I want to show an idea that is not so intuitive but quite strong. d6, and now white has tried bishop g5 in some games. Of course there are other moves, but our development scheme is pretty straightforward, with knight f6, castles and so on. Here I would actually suggest not to play knight f6 and not go into a pin, but to play knight e7. The reason is that that black has a very interesting plan at his disposal that I just wanted to demonstrate. If white plays a slow move now, and it is a fairly logical one, c3, to get some squares for the queen, we have an interesting way to grab the initiative, and this is like that. I just wanted to show that because that is not extremely intuitive, but once you see it, you see that it is quite strong. We are threatening this, winning the piece, and after a capture, knight takes, black has a very active position, and I think it's already better in some way. We can oftentimes grab the bishop pair, and the whole space advantage is worth something. Queen a4, not really something to worry about. It is more frequently seen that white plays the move queen to e3. And as mentioned, this makes it a bit more difficult for us to play d5. I suggest to play knight f6, very logical move. And now white, most of the time, plays the move knight to c3, going for queenside castling. We should check the move bishop d2 and the moves bishop d2 and e5. Bishop d2 is oftentimes just a transpositional move, because after bishop d2, bishop b4, they play knight c3. A move that is, however, important to check is the move e5. This is actually a mistake, and a pretty severe one, but to refute it is somewhat demanding. And I have to say that I was a little bit struggling here with, I was arguing with myself what to recommend here, because the best continuation involves a piece sacrifice that is very difficult to analyze to a win or to a very, very clear advantage. You can do it, but it's heaps of theory. And so I decided to just show you some key lines, and sometimes you just have to go with it. I'm showing you the positions, and I hope you will agree that this is worth a piece. Okay, so knight g4 is the thing. We attack the queen, and now white has a choice of queen moves, queen e2 or queen to e4. If they go queen to e2, this is the simpler one. After queen to e2, we have a very simple continuation that is just very strong. Our knight is hanging, and we play d6. covering the piece. Okay, white can take with check. That's important. But we just play bishop e6. And we play in Gambit style. So if white now continues to take material, like here, we simply recapture. And now if you look at this, we've got 3 pieces in play, the queen in play, and white has nothing developed, like nothing, and you're ready to castle long. This is already winning. By computer standards, this is winning, because white cannot defend this against this attack. And we are just a pawn down, 1 pawn. So this is a very simple one. You get a fantastic attack here after this continuation, bishop e6, or d6 takes bishop e6. The more critical move is the move queen to e4, which does in a way the same thing. It attacks the knight. However, the difference is that if we play d6 now, and I would like to recommend that, but I cannot, after this, white takes bishop e6, the same thing, and now white has, and this is quite weird, but it is the case, has the miracle move bishop a6, and that unfortunately is not better for black. I know it looks completely wacky, but it is not better for black. This is not really a problem, because we have something very strong, but that forces us, this line forces us to play into this very drastic line with the piece sacrifice. So that is the move knight g takes e5. Why is that a piece sacrifice? Because white can play f4, and now this knight will be lost. There's just no way around that, unless white plays something super stupid, next couple of moves, but otherwise the knight will be lost due to the e-file pinning situation. Knight g takes e5 is a really cool move that I first learned about on a very classic DVD by Jan Gustafsson that he released some years ago about the open games with black. It's a really great DVD. I don't have it anymore, unfortunately, so I don't know exactly what Jan gave on the DVD. So it might be identical to my moves, but I cannot really check anymore. I don't have the thing anymore. So what happens here? Black goes d5, gaining space on the queen. And now the queen has to retreat on the e-file so that the knight is actually won. Otherwise we would just move it away. So the most important move is queen e3 to check. Queen e2 also needs to be checked. Here we get a fantastic attack, really, without analyzing all that much. So how do we do it? We can play, amongst others, by the way, that is not the only continuation. We can play bishop g4, attacking the queen again, knight f3, most logical. And now we simply play for development, very quick development. Bishop c5, giving away the knight. If white now plays h3, we can take and castle. And this, for example, like takes, is a position that you can continue to analyze and trying to like mathematically prove that black is winning, but this is something that I have not done here. I'm just calling this a win for black, or a winning attack, and stopping at this point. If you feel completely uncomfortable in such a situation, it is very much advisable to analyze a little bit for yourself. It's really essential that you are comfortable with a position like that. You have 2 pawns for the piece. Every piece that you have is in play, and you have a fantastic attack. This is a piece sacrifice that a strong player will be happy to make. The same kind of sacrifice here, white takes here, is even worse for white because of the direct knight jump, knight d4. And now white simply has no good square to go to. Where do you want to go to? Queen d3 is answered by bishop f5. So this whole queen e2 move is rather easily refuted. And again, this is just one of the refutations. The move queen to e3 instead is a little bit more difficult to tackle. It looks at the square, so we don't have don't have those tempo gainers. We have other tempo gainers, however. In this case, we play d4, attacking the queen again. And now white should go to e2. That makes it most difficult. If white goes to e4 instead, we have the check on h4, and after g3 we have the move queen to g4. And now, due to that pinning situation, we don't even have to sacrifice anything. We actually have won a pawn with a great position to boot. If white plays this, we have queen g6. It's a nice little thing to know and remember. So, what does white do? He has to go to e2, which is not a very happy move to play. You're clogging up your development even more. Here, I suggest to play the move bishop g4, developing this bishop with tempo. Knight f3, not much else. It's very logical also. And now bishop b4 check, king d1, and d3. We are immediately trying to play a breakthrough in the center. I mean, note all of our pieces are in the attack. This is not a position that white will be very happy to play. This is also something you should absolutely remember if you look at such a line. Even if you feel a little bit uncomfortable with giving up material, and you will be down a bit of material here as well. At first you will get it back, but okay. Note that you know this line, you know what's happening, and you are aware that you have a good position despite giving away a little bit of material at first. White has stumbled into that and has to somehow find his way around, which will be very difficult. Okay, white takes, I think, seems very logical, and now simply we take with the queen. So, take, and this is the piece that we give for the moment. Long castles, and we attack the bishop. Yeah, and now we have to check two moves. The move king c2 to cover the bishop, or the move a3 trying to play for a counter attack. We should maybe start with king c2. After king c2, we take on f3, check, king to d1, only move, and now just rook h to e8. And this is something that is useful to remember, this kind of line. Now white, despite queens off the board, white has no decent way to prevent us from taking on f3 and win back the material with interest. There's just no option to prevent that. Yeah, what is he supposed to play? If he plays a move like this, we take on f3, the bishop is hanging, king c2, and now knight e1 check. And this ending is winning for black. Yeah, we have material-wise, we are already better. We have a rook and two pawns for two minor pieces, and white has serious issues to develop. On top of that, those pawns are targets. So black is in fantastic shape. It's important to remember this situation here. With rook h to e8, we play a smallish, silent move that is very strong. Okay, white can also play, if we go back a couple of moves to this position, he can also play a3, like a counter-attacking idea, after which we take this with check and king e2. Now we see the idea, the rook is hanging and our bishop is hanging. And here there are quite a couple of promising positions, continuations, I'm sorry. I'm suggesting one that I think is quite convincing, but there's more than one. So if you feel like insecure, there are many good lines. White has really big problems to stay on the board. So rook e8 check is my recommendation. We give this away, yes. Bishop f5 check. King doesn't have many squares, only this one. And now rook e4 check. Yeah, so it's very, very funny to play like that, very entertaining play. Now the king has to go somewhere. Yeah, king d3 is a very attractive line that leads to an immediate mate. Rook e5 check, king c4, rook c5 check, king b3, bishop e6 check, king a4, b5, or rook a5 checkmate. Just very nice. So he has to go to b3. And this line is very long, but also very forcing. Check. King needs to go to a2. Yeah? Note that this is mate, yeah? Okay, king to a2, check, b3, only move. And now rook e2, check again. Now white has to interpose, and we can capture this and now take on b3. Currently we are a rook down, but we attack a lot. The rook, this with a check, and we already have 1-2 pawns. After f5, a little bit of a disturbing move, bishop d5, king b2, this is probably best. White gives us back, but at the end we reach a very, very good ending. Yeah, this is something, if you are really ambitious, you can try to find out if it's a forced win or not. Probably it's difficult to determine, but black has 3 pawns for the exchange, and the pawns are extremely healthy. There are no weakened pawns or structural issues, so black is clearly better. This whole line with queen e4, knight g takes e5 is quite complicated, but very, very good for black. If you feel insecure about this, look at the lines presented here and maybe add a little bit on your own. It's fun to analyze. I mean, you're chasing the white queen and king around. It's really fun to look at. And don't be very very concerned about all this, because it is much easier to play with black. Even if you forget a little detail and you have it on the board, don't be too worried. Black is in good shape and is much, much easier to play in a real game. So that was e5. Yeah, we have to quickly check bishop d2. As mentioned, this is mostly a transposition, but there's one independent idea. After bishop b4, white normally plays knight c3, but I saw that sometimes they go a3, and we just capture and castle. Quick development. Now white castles long, and here black has a choice. The easiest move to play, and the one that basically proves that black is fine, is the move d5. It's very principled. Yeah, white has neglected control over that square, so playing d5 is something that is certainly very logical. The only issue with this move can be that the game might be simplified quite a bit after white's move queen to g3. If you want to keep more tension, you can play rook e8, of course. There's nothing wrong with that. After d5 and queen g3, I did not find a better move than taking on e4. After that, however, we have a long sequence of moves that leads to an equal ending. I mean, it's not like you cannot win such an ending. If anybody, I would rather take black. Yeah, have a slightly better pawn structure. Have a look at this, but it's equal if white plays it correctly. So if you want to complicate it a little bit more, you have to play rook e8 here. Still a very rare line anyway. Most people don't play this. They play knight c3. I'm sorry. So bishop b4, develop quickly, of course. Bishop d2 and castling short. White castles long, and we play rook e8. So the quickest possible development scheme is what we are after. This is the main position of this center game, center gambit, whatever you may want to call it, or middle gambit in the middle. This is a central position there, and objectively speaking, black is better. It is, however, rather complicated, and this is something that you have to be aware of, and this is a general chess thing, not just a e4, e5 thing, or applying to this repertoire. If white wants to play some shady gambit and get a crazy position, he will always be able to do so. You cannot prevent that. If you play with the mindset to never take material and never be willing to defend if it is good for you, then you have problems in the opening sometimes. If they play something weird, you have to take the material and be okay, defend. Or here, you will also see that we will grab material quite often, and we are just better with black. So you have to take it and be willing to play this kind of game with white. So what does white try here? Traditionally, the main move here has been queen to g3, but that basically seems refuted nowadays. It just seems to be good for black, or seems as maybe bad language or incorrect language. It is bad for white. So let's have a look at the moves. If white tries to avoid queen g3, there are mostly two options: queen to f4, which is rare, admittedly, and bishop c4. We have to check those briefly. It's not a lot of effort, but let's do it. Queen to f4. It has been played in some blitz games by Jan Nepomniachtchi, but, well, blitz chess, you know. They try all kinds of things in blitz that you wouldn't ever touch in a classical time control game, and this is, I think, one of those lines. My recommendation is to play as Vishy Anand did. Vishy took and grabbed the pawn. So what is white's compensation? I don't think he has enough, but what he has is he has a good bishop here. That is an active piece. And this is also why I recommend to quickly play this, intending to play d4, shutting down this piece. After f3, rook to e6, knight e2. Vishy played a very strong move. I think that's really strong play. Right? We are talking about a blitz game. Rook d6. This is strong. It makes this bishop look a little bit better, and most importantly, threaten d4. If we manage to play d4, the whole white game doesn't make any sense. And black here is basically just a pawn up. It is what it is. The move queen f4, therefore, is not really, very dangerous. This is a different story. Bishop c4. This is important because what you should not do, it's a bit of a trap, what you should not do is now grab the pawn on e4 immediately. It looks very tempting to play like this. However, after queen to f4, white has enough compensation, and in fact, it is difficult to play. This is really a case where we give white too much. There is one pawn that we should not take in this particular case. What we can do, however, is to play d6, just normal move to get this bishop active later. Now f3. Yeah, white has to cover it at some point. So f3. And now my suggestion is to simply play the move knight to a5 to attack this bishop. Yeah, the bishop now will have to go away from that dangerous diagonal. Yeah, bishop b3 is a very lame move. So bishop d3. And now my suggestion is to just go d5. And I don't see why black shouldn't be better. Yeah, I think black has the better game. We are threatening d4, immediately winning a piece. And white has to play some unattractive moves now to defend already. So I don't really see any attractiveness in bishop c4. Just be aware of this trap that you should not grab the pawn. The e4 pawn is often lost here or sacrificed by white, and one case where we should grab it is the traditional main line of this opening, queen to g3. Here it is in fact the strongest to take this pawn. Knight takes. Rook takes e4 is actually also a move. This is what I usually played in this position. But now looking at all those lines and compiling it for this repertoire, I recognize that taking with the knight is stronger. So this, white goes c3. This is more or less what you have to do. If white tries bishop f4, there is queen to f6. And okay, I think I should have phrased that differently. This is the more complicated option, but c3 is maybe the better one. Okay, let's have a look at this. Queen f6. First of all, here we attack the bishop, of course, 2 times. So it has to do something, or it has to be covered. White cannot take on c7, as d6 is trapping the bishop. This is just a corner, yeah? Cannot keep it. It's funny, eh? No square. So white plays knight to h3 to cover the bishop. And now it will be very sharp, but also very good for black. d6. This threatens to simply capture and capture, winning a piece. The best move seems to be bishop d3. And here, a key move to remember is the move knight to d4, initiating very, very wild complications. It's funny to know that this position already was on the board more than 100 years ago between Mises and Capablanca. So it's a very old way to play. So what should white do now? In a game that was played in 2007, yeah, almost 100-year difference between Nepomniachtchi and Vallejo Pons, Nepomniachtchi played the move king to b1. And we should look at this as the main line. In the original game between Mises and Capablanca, bishop e3 was played. After bishop e3, however, we are just better with normal moves, let's say. Knight f5, this is better than Capablanca's bishop g4. Queen f3, and just back with the rook. Yeah, here, this is just not enough. White does not have enough for the material deficit here. We have won a center pawn. Should never forget that. It's a big pawn, and if we are not basically checkmated quickly, it's the only danger, then we are better. A bit more dangerous is the move king to b1. Yeah, this goes out, or this leaves this check on e2. Still, the move knight e2 is strong, and it was played by Vallejo, knight e2. White plays queen f3, and now black has a fantastic resource, and this is something that it's better to know beforehand, because if you look at this position and trying to solve it, you will be in some trouble, and you have lots of pieces hanging. The rook is attacked twice, and the bishop here is also attacking the knight, so we have some pieces hanging. Black, however, gets a winning position with the shocking move bishop a3. This is very nice, yeah? Threatening checkmate. And yeah, white doesn't really have anything great here available. He has to take it. It's a critical move. Check. King c1. And we grab the pawn. Yeah, king d2, queen c3 mate. So king b1 back. And the check. So we have basically won the pawn on a2 for nothing, and now we solve the whole situation. I mean, black is currently a piece down, but this is not a problem. We take on h3, and after bishop takes, we have the important resource, bishop takes g2. Very nice tactics that work out perfectly. After queen takes f4 check, king b2, knight takes e4. Black has a winning position, and Vallejo won this quite easily. I mean, white did not resign yet, but it was a position where resignation would have been okay. Yeah? This is a very tactical line, but a very important line as well. That means that if we go back to this, the move bishop f4 is basically defanged. And if you cannot go bishop f4, and you don't want to allow a trade on d2, yeah? So what do you do? I mean, white has given away a center pawn. It's important to keep in mind. You have to do something concrete. So the move c3 was tried there. Bishop back to e7. The only thing that you absolutely have to be aware of is the somewhat tricky position of the rook. It's in the middle of the board and somewhat disconnected to the rest of black's forces. This is not a problem objectively, but it's something that will demand a little bit of precision. So let's have a look at bishop d3 first, attacking this. We should go bishop h4, gaining a tempo. The queen only has f3, and now we go back. And that was important, gaining that tempo, because now we have the way all the way back to e8. We are also threatening knight e5 now, and white here has insufficient compensation, quite clearly. Instead of, if we go back, bishop d3, white has tried knight f3, but here after d6, this is still not enough, because the move rook g4 is an extremely annoying idea now. Note that the white queen has exactly 0 squares. 0. So white has to play something very lame now, like h3, and after knight e5, we are now secure with the rook. Yeah, the rook can take here and always has the square on a5. It's still a little bit odd, but black must be better. I mean, this is never enough compensation for a center pawn. So nothing to worry about. After f4, by the way, we have to go to a5. But, well, the rook is not trapped. And if you ask yourself, who's got the better king position, I would say black. Yeah? So not a problem at all. An important line here, however, is the move f4. This keeps e5 under control and tries to harass the rook on the next move. Here we need to know one particular idea, and this is the following. d5, bishop d3, and now the move bishop to f5. We simply offer an exchange. And this is an exchange that, we happily sacrifice. We will get fantastic compensation. It's difficult for white now to not take the exchange. We have easy moves if he doesn't take. We play the same way basically as we do after the capture. Queen d7 is the next move, covering this if white doesn't capture on e4. So we have to look at the capture. Takes, bishop takes. And we simply argue that we already have a pawn, so it's a pawn and a minor piece for rook. Not quite enough materially, but this is such a great piece. Yeah. Note that if you ask a computer, for example, it already gives black a winning position, which is strong. Yeah? It's a strong assessment. But once you see the idea, knight f3, queen d7, once you realize that we are trying to play knight a5 and queen a4, you see that this is a fantastic compensation, really. Yeah, note that white cannot gain control over the a4 square. This is not a good idea. Yeah, with the classic Boden's mate, named after some person, Boden. He invented this mate, it seems, and was nowhere. He never really appears outside of this, but this is the mate that he invented, or was he gave the name, or he lended his name for that mate. So we have fantastic compensation here. Yeah, this is the dream, for every Petrosian fan, sacrificing the exchange for such a fantastic piece. This is basically the center game, this d4, e takes, queen d4. Black is in very good shape, but it is murky. That is the story of the Gambit play here. So we absolutely now have to check the second Gambit that white has available, the notorious King's Gambit, f4. The King's Gambit is a very, very peculiar opening. It has a long history. It was already analyzed 6 centuries ago, and the idea that white has is actually quite logical. It has a problem, of course, this opening, but the idea itself is logical. What white wants to do is, he argues that you want to develop like that and want to attack black here on the weakest square on f7, and before you want to place those pieces, you want to make sure that the f file is actually open. So it does have some strategic justification. The problem with the opening is, and this is now something where I can quote former world champion Vladimir Kramnik, it loses a pawn and it weakens the king. This is a funny statement that that Kramnik made about the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit, we can simply we can sum up in one sentence. It's going to be very murky. White will try to probably go for your throat, so be absolutely prepared that it will be some kind of chaotic game, but it will be a chaotic game where we will be better. Yeah, white has to fight. It's very difficult for white to equalize in the King's Gambit, and I think it's not possible actually. Black is better probably to some extent. Difficult to tell how much extent, but definitely black is for choice if you play well. Still, very complicated, very murky. We have to be simply ready that now it will be some kind of fist fight and not some elaborate maneuvering game. So what is good against the King's Gambit? In fact, quite a number of lines are good for black. I decided to take. I think this is the most principled move, and it has the advantage of being, it has the best balance between simplicity and punishment. We will see. And we want to really, against f4, against the King's Gambit, we want to play for an advantage and try to refute it in some way. And this is, I think, only possible with the capture. The other good line that is okay is d5. So I just want to show briefly, because if you ever watched my YouTube channel, I once made a video on that for black and concluded that black is fine. That is true. Black is fine, but I don't think he's better. And that is the difference to taking on f4. I think after taking and playing the best possible lines, black has an advantage. So let's try to prove this then. Yeah, why do I think black is better? Let's start. White has tried lots of moves already in this position, but it is pretty clear that only two moves are actually interesting, or let's say where it is difficult to prove an advantage. The other ones are just bad, basically. And the good moves are, relatively speaking, knight f3 and bishop c4. Quite logical. Yeah? White wants to play in this direction, and so wants to prepare castling and so on. That makes perfect sense. However, white has tried a number of oddities, and we have to check all those weird moves as well. So let's start with a couple of weird lines that are worth looking at briefly. Queen to f3. Yeah, that is a really weird looking move. White tries to attack this with the queen, get it back with the queen if possible, and sets a little trap. And this is why I'm covering this, because here the most obvious move is to give the check on h4, and surprisingly this is not that great. After g3 takes, we have to go back with the queen, and white actually has some pressure. Yeah, he's got this with the tempo, the h file is open. So in one word, don't do that. It is much better to develop. If we go knight c6 here, white, I think, is already in some quite substantial trouble. So what should he do now? He can take on f4, or he can play c3 covering the d4 square. If you play c3, I suggest to play the check. What is the difference? The difference is that after this sequence, white does not have the move knight c3 anymore. That would have been the problem in the other line. Here, white is in deep trouble, because we are intending to play d5 and just put pressure against the king and on the e4 pawn. This is just terrible for white, just absolutely terrible. So after the move knight c6, c3 is no good. They usually take with the queen. I mean, if that gets on the board, it's a super rare line. Here we play bishop d6, tempo. I know it looks odd, yeah, in front of the pawn, but this way we get very quickly castled. And here white is in terrible shape already. Yeah? Black's coming attack will be devastating almost. If white tries to be completely greedy like this, we have more than one way to gain a fantastic attack for the piece. I suggest to play the check. And now play d6. It looks a bit weird, but weird is wrong. A bit wild, so is the word I wanted to say. But black's attack is going to be extremely dangerous. For example, if we look at this, black has every single piece in the attack. This is also coming out quickly. And white only has moved pawns and the queen. That is just not how chess is working. Yeah, black has a winning attack. Queen f3 is a really strange move. It's actually a brainchild of Julia Breyer, who invented the Breyer variation in the Ruy Lopez, one of the most solid and best opening lines. Quite funny that he also invented this one, which is really just bad. So other moves. White can play the also somewhat strange move bishop e2. This is covered here because the best reply, and there is really a best reply, is not super intuitive. Actually not intuitive at all. Once you see it, you see, okay, it's good, but it's not the kind of move that you would probably just play over the board without knowing it. And it is the move f5. It's a bit strange, I know, but just see what it leads to. Yeah, f5. Yeah, white can take on f5 or play e5. e5 is quite easy to play against. You play d6, attack the pawn, d4, and after this very logical sequence, we are clearly better. This pawn is probably going to be lost. Yeah, white has insufficient piece placement to support this pawn. e5 is also quite strange. Yeah? So let's look at the capture on f5. And now we see the point. We will check, play d5. So what have we accomplished? We have driven the king to f1, and with f5, e takes f5 inserted, we were able to play d5. So after knight f3, queen to f6, we have a very, very attractive game. We will win this pawn back easily, and with bishop to d6, we cover f4. So here it looks like we might be just a pawn up, and white has a king on f1, which is fairly ridiculous. So here we are just clearly better. Bishop e2 is just a pretty terrible move. Two other pretty terrible moves are knight c3 and d4. You can start with knight c3. It's a very romantic idea. The idea is that after queen h4 check, white plays king e2. These kind of ideas were devised in the 19th century, where they thought that with knight f3 there would be a decent time gain on the queen, and then the king position wouldn't matter all that much. This is, however, simply untrue. The white cannot play in that way, as we will see in the upcoming line. The best move and easiest to manage here is to play just queen to e7. It is important to remember. We prophylactically remove the queen from knight f3 and immediately look at the king, intending to play knight f6, d5, or combinations of those moves. Here, white is in pretty bad shape already. For example, if white plays the move d3, we clone knight f6 and play d5. And now we have a very easy game. We play knight c6, we put the bishop out to here, or e6, castle long. The king is on e2. Well, that's quite funny. Yeah? So black is in excellent shape. If white instead, after queen to e7, plays the move d4, we will immediately attack e4. This is hanging. e5, and after d6, very natural sequence of moves. Black is already winning. Yeah, well, what is that? Yeah, so the whole white opening just honestly doesn't make any sense. That was knight c3, and there's a very related line in d4. Here we also play the check, and after king e2, go back to e7. And this is basically a transposition now. Yeah, after knight c3, knight f6, this is a position that we have looked at already, and black is just clearly better, almost winning. Yeah, it looks very, very bad. The reason why I cannot call it winning is that there are lines where white is just like a pawn down and has no compensation, which is not winning, maybe, but close to. So that brings us back to the starting position of the King's Gambit accepted, where white has the two moves knight f3 and bishop c4. These have been the main lines since the opening was invented, and they are really a lot better in comparison to the oddities. So I suggest to start looking at bishop c4 first, the so-called bishop's gambit, just because that is compared to knight f3 probably less frequently played. Against bishop c4, black has a a fairly wide range of possibilities, and for this series, for this course, I've looked at a couple, but ultimately decided to recommend the line Queen H4 check. So moving or attacking the king so that it has to go to F1. White's idea is that with knight F3 he will get a tempo on the queen, and this will compensate for the king position on F1. That is the romantic approach that White has. However, we are not in the 19th century anymore, and the problem with all those gambit lines is that computers have shown on a very general level that the defense in positions is often very strong. You can defend many positions and giving away material, and here we are not just talking about White being a pawn down. He also has given something up, which is his king safety. As Kramnik said, it weakens the king. King is not good on F1. This, I believe, is the best line for black, now with d6. I have to mention that this line has been covered in a couple of books in recent years. It was covered, for example, by Victor Bologan in his Bologan's Black Weapons, and by Nikolaos Nitirlis in his book, I think E4, E5, a classical repertoire for black. And I basically took their analysis, I added something here and there, and took some lines to a little bit of a different twist, but I'm basically saying what they analyzed is best for black, and I'm just adopting it. There is a really little point in trying to find something else. If there's something good, you just should recommend it. I usually try to recommend something that is not in books yet, just to have the sense of exploration. But it does make little sense here. If you have something that is good for black, you should just recommend it. So here, White has tried basically two approaches. He has tried to play with d4 or without d4, delaying this move. And he can start with knight f3 or with other moves. It's a little bit difficult to cover all the different move orders that White may go for, because he can start with knight c3 and then play knight f3, or there are different move orders available. However, if you absolutely are aware of the setup that we're aiming for, you should not have a problem here, because the setup is basically the same, basically no matter what White is doing. What black wants to do is he wants to put the bishop onto e6, which is a tempo gainer in a way. White does not really want to take on e6. There are some lines where he does that, tries that, unpromising lines. But it's basically a tempo win with bishop e6. Oftentimes White will remove the bishop or need to spend a queen move to cover it. So this bishop goes to e6, and we play knight to d7. And then we aim for queenside castling. And this is a super important point that I was absolutely never aware of before I looked at this line now for this course, that queen h4 is a developing move in terms of castling queenside. Black will very often go to the queenside with the king, and actually at the end start an attack on the white king once we are safe on the other side of the board. So bishop e6, knight d7, the knight on g8 will go to f6, and the next important thing that you have to remember is what to do with the queen in case of knight f3. White can play knight f3 right away, or basically any coming move, and you have to react with the queen. The basic idea is to go to h6, basically no matter what. The reason is, this is a good square for the queen. We cover f4, and I should probably unpaint a little bit. If you imagine the queen being here, one key idea is to play knight f6 and knight to h5 in some cases to threaten knight g3 check. It sounds very abstract, but you will see that it plays an important role in the coming complications. So let's start with knight c3, delaying knight f3, delaying d4, and it will basically be very transpositional. We go bishop e6, and now white has a couple of moves available. As mentioned, it is not really critical if white takes. That is basically never critical. So black recaptures, knight f3, and here I wouldn't go to h6. Not that this would be bad, but going to f6 looks even better. Yeah, after later g5, we will have covered the rook, and white is a pawn down. And I mean, he's got the king on f1. Yeah, we are here 2 moves away from castling long, after which we have a safe king. So this is basically just excellent for black. It cannot be critical to take on e6. This move, I mean. So what else can white do? He can retreat to b3. And this is one of the rare examples where a top player has played this opening with white. Ivanchuk sometimes plays this in blitz chess or rapid chess. And we have an example game against Sergei Karyakin. Karyakin played knight d7 in this position, which is kind of according to the general setup and not a bad move at all. But I think knight f6 is even stronger. We are directly angling for those kind of ideas. So knight f3, for example, queen to h6, and after d4, bishop e7, I don't really see what white has. Yeah, white will not get this back. Yeah? After a move like knight e2, for example, we have this knight h5 idea, as mentioned. So I don't really see where white's compensation is. I just don't see it. Well, here you can even consider to castle short if you like, but both sides of castling are probably okay. Going back to this position after knight c3, bishop e6, we can also check the move knight d5. It was, I think, almost never played, but it's not too bad compared to the other lines. I suggest to simply take it. I mean, c7 was attacked, play c6, and develop. Very natural. After knight f3, we drop back to h6. Yeah, honestly, I don't think that this is enough. White is a pawn down, and we have easy moves. Knight d7, bishop e7, and if there is an attack on the pawn, we have knight h5 to cover this. I don't think this is enough. Again, you have options to castle to both sides of the board and have to check according to what white does. But I simply cannot believe that white has compensation for a pawn. I mean, I would even prefer black if we wouldn't have an extra pawn, but it's kind of difficult to imagine how that would look like. I mean, it's very specific. Never forget, this is not good. Okay, that was knight d5 at this position. Once you're here, the move queen to e2 is probably the most frequently seen. We go knight d7, as mentioned, speeding up development on the queen side. And from here, this is a very transpositional situation. For example, after knight f3, this is the position after queen to h6 that could easily have happened after an earlier knight f3. So, yeah, remember the setup. That is key. And honestly, this is all I know. Yeah, it's not like I know every single permutation by heart. I know how to set the pieces up, and then I will show you there's 1 or 2 things that you absolutely should be aware of. So we can start with d4 here, knight f6, and now white can play knight f3, after which we go queen h6. This is something that we will look at later. Or white can play knight b5. This knight b5 idea is happening quite often in various, let's say, in various versions. Yeah, white having inserted knight f3, queen h6, with d4, without d4, and so on. The key thing that you have to remember is that there's one situation, and we will look at this later, there is one situation where if you want to fight, you should play king to d8 to cover that. And in all other cases, you can play long castles. In that other situation that we will look at later, castling has the drawback of allowing a draw. Okay, that sounds a little bit odd at the moment. We should look at concrete moves. Okay, here the best move is queenside castling. And this is not an easy move to make if you don't know it beforehand, of course. Knight takes a7 check, king b8. We happily give up that pawn for the time gained. For example, if white now takes on e6, we recapture, and white goes back, we play g5, and now it's all black. We now start an attack on the white king, and that attack is much more dangerous than anything that white may throw at us. I mean, where are the attacking pieces? Yes, we have given back a pawn, but white's position is pretty much unplayable. If you ask an engine, it's like +2 or something. It's just winning. The alternative move for white is to play knight b5, just not taking on e6. But here we take on c4 and play c6, send the knight back, and after knight g4 again, we have a fantastic attack for that pawn that we have returned. We're not even a pawn down, we were a pawn up to begin with. And here we just have a fantastic attack for no material deficit. This knight b5 idea is extremely important to remember, that we have the long castling as a reply. So let's go back and check a different version of that. If we go back, we were here and we have looked at d4. We have to also look at this, knight f3, queen h6, and then again white can go knight b5 or all those other moves. Knight b5 is the most critical one. If white starts knight d5, we can just castle without giving up anything. Yeah, that's obviously very comfortable. White goes d4, we can take, play knight f6, and now after g5 we will have the attack. The f pawn is not important. Yeah, we have easy attacking moves, g4 and so on. White king is just in bad shape, and our king is perfectly safe. Knight e5 is really not dangerous at all. Most critical, as mentioned, is knight b5, but before we look at this, we can look at d4 first. We go knight f6, and this is something that we will look at again later. Yeah, there are again various versions of that. So if white instead plays knight b5 here, again we castle. White can now take and play queen c4 or immediately take on a7. Let's look at this first. White threatens mate. Okay, we go c6, check, and now king to c7. This is important, yeah? You should not go to b8, as white has the tricky move queen to b4. After the capture, there's queen a5. Just remember, always go to c7. And now, if we look at this, the knight here is stranded. It doesn't do much. And we are going to have a big counter-attack. We will see various versions of that later. Yeah, for example, white can check now, king back to b8, yeah, and we just have easy moves, like e5 to cover that, g5, knight f6. The king now is safe. A different version of that is the immediate capture on a7, king b8, knight b5, knight f6. And here white is in a lot of trouble. We have easy attacking moves, and white has to get something concrete going. The only interesting idea here is to take and play queen f2, intending queen a7 check. Here it's important to be absolutely cold-blooded. We can play c6, check, king to c8, knight b to d4, and e5, simply asking white what he's intending to do there. Note that white is so much lost if it's, I mean, he has to do something very concrete to not just be totally lost. So knight takes c6 is the only thing that is kind of sensible. If you retreat, yeah, you simply have no attack whatsoever. I mean, if white retreats, he has no attack whatsoever. So we have to take this knight. Check. King b8. And b4. Yeah, so white is trying some kind of desperate Hail Mary counterattack. But after knight e8, our knight will help. I mean, on a very general level, this kind of attack for white should not work because he has no attacking pieces, but we should still check it and be sure that it is fine for black. So here, after knight e8, we can check two lines that actually lead to the same position. White can take on c6 or play b5. If white goes b5, we play knight c7, queen takes this, and now the important resource, not the only move, but it's the easiest to play, d5, getting this queen back into the game. After e takes d5, knight to b6, black is a lot better here because we will win those pawns. They are impossible to keep, and there's still the bad white king. So black is clearly better here. If you give this whole line, by the way, I just wanted to mention, if you start here, and if you give it to engines, they will point out other solutions for black that are even evaluated higher by the computer, but this is rather complicated. If you remember the idea that you get d5, and I want to show that we looked at this, that was the first thing we looked at. Here we have exactly the same idea. Yeah. And black is getting the queen back into the game. If you remember this idea, I think this is much easier than memorizing a whole bunch of super complicated lines. So here, black is close to a winning advantage also with this line. Okay, so it's kind of difficult for me to make sure that I'm not overlooking any concrete continuation there, right? Because there are so many different lines available that see black playing the same moves, and it's kind of tricky. So if we go back here, so we looked at knight c3 here, after which we go bishop e6, and I think we have looked at all of the continuations. I have to check this in my move list here to be sure. It's not easy. There are so many different permutations of moves. It's not really a big deal for black to memorize this. I just want to make sure that I'm not forgetting it here to show. I mean, to memorize is the wrong phrasing. You have the same setup. You play bishop e6, knight e7, knight f6, just that there are so many permutations. If you make it out like move by move, it's a little bit much, and you can easily get lost in the presentation. So white can also go d4, bishop e6, and again this is highly transpositional. What can white do here in this position? The capture, as usual, is not great. Yeah, here we are fine with queen h6, with queen f6, and so on. This is not a problem at all. If white plays d5, which is a very strange move, yeah, but still, we should check it briefly. Bishop g4. And the issue is that it's killing the bishop and giving us excellent control over e5. So that's completely harmless, d5. And after the most common moves, queen e2 and queen d3, we are transposing, I think. After queen e2, we play knight d7, knight c3, knight f6, and this is a position that we will check in, maybe like 5 minutes, maybe less. Yeah, because that usually happens when white starts with knight f3. If we go back to this, white can go queen d3, but we play the same stuff. Yeah, it's always the same setup. That makes it relatively simple to learn. Okay, ultimately, instead of this, we should check knight f3, directly attacking the queen. It's probably the most natural move. Queen to h6, our standard square. And now white can go d4 on knight c3. Knight c3 is not very common in this position, and very likely after bishop e6, queen e2, knight e7, we transpose to something that we have seen earlier. Yeah, it's very transposition heavy. Yeah? If white goes d4, knight f6, for example, we look at something that we'll check now, basically, because this is what will happen after d4, most likely. We play bishop e6, and now white has tried the queen moves, and bishop takes e6. The queen moves are most critical. We can start with bishop e6, get that out of the way. We take with the f-pawn, of course, and now g3. That is the only move that kind of tries to make some sense out of the capture. But we are in great shape, actually. We go e5, support the f4 pawn, and here white is already in trouble, not very surprisingly. There's a game between two players, Koziak and Bartel, in 2011, where white captured on e5, but after the check and d takes e5, black is already winning. Bishop c5 check. I mean, white's king is in trouble. This capture on e6 is basically never an issue. After bishop e6, we have to look at the queen moves, queen e2 and queen d3. The move queen d3 is probably the more dangerous of the two, because it has 2 additional points compared to queen e2. So let's start with queen e2, and queen d3 will be the final move to check. Here we play again knight d7, knight c3, knight f6. Not very surprising. So white has 2 basic ideas here that look interesting. He can play knight b5 again, or he can play e5. If he goes knight b5, we castle again. We know that idea already. Here black is again in excellent shape. We have to check 2 moves, bishop takes e6 and the capture on a7. The capture on a7 is very bad, because here knight takes e4 is strong. It's even stronger than other continuations. Here white is facing this fantastic threat, and something like this doesn't help. Yeah, this is just too quick. So knight takes a7 is completely harmless. Bishop takes e6 is a bit more interesting, but these ideas we also already know. If white now takes on a7, we gain a huge initiative by that way. It's a little bit, we've seen something similar already, but you have to remember those motifs. More dangerous is probably queen c4, attacking this. And now we should not play a passive move, relatively speaking, with knight e8, but simply play c6, encourage white to capture. So takes, and now we go to c7. It is a usual reply there. The move king b8 here has the drawback that knight takes c6, amongst others, will probably force a draw. But after this, we are better. And we have to check why. So white's best move is bishop d2, intending to play the check on a5. If he goes knight b5, black is better. Again, here by means of d5, or probably the most straightforward is to simply take on e4. That is the clearest way. White takes d5, and we get the piece back. Now, if we take stock, it's equal material. We have returned the a7 pawn, but at the end, it is this. Black has a strong attack for no material down. Very nice. After the better move, after king c7, bishop d2, we play rook a8 to attack the knight. It has to check. King back. And white has to return, after which we go d5. So black is grabbing the initiative. Queen e2. And now, very nice move, bishop b4, developing this piece. And here our attention has shifted somewhat. We now try to get rid of this knight and then ultimately place this knight on e4 where it will be fantastically placed. So g3 is the most testing idea. Using this situation, we check, we trade, and we take on c3. This is a little point that is worth noting. This move, which looks desirable, is answered by the funny reply knight d5 with some crazy tactics happening. This is really not necessary to allow, and also very unnecessary now to analyze. After the move bishop takes c3, bishop f4 check, king to c8, and this, we have an equal material position where black is a lot better. This knight is so strong that this bishop is not really, it's not a comparably good piece. And the most important thing, this is a very bad power structure. So black is in excellent shape. So that is the position after here, white playing knight b5. White can also play e5 in this position, after which we take. After d takes, knight h5 is already devastating. This is a super strong threat. So white has to take with the knight. We take this. And here, this is the only situation where it's helpful to remember the move, but it is actually quite logical. Bishop b6, we give up this pawn, and now we are ready for this swift counter-attack. This is a very typical scenario. Oftentimes black will give back a pawn and at the end start the counter-attack against white's king and generally uncoordinated position. This is the queen e2 move on move 7. If we go back, I know it's this is a difficult part of this repertoire. This was the move queen e2, and this is now queen d3. The good thing is we have the same moves all the time. Knight d7, knight c3, knight f6. So we place our pieces in the typical way that we already have seen. Okay, here knight b5 must be critical. After knight e2, we go knight h5. No? Important. This is why we go here. And here I don't really see enough compensation for the pawn. Again, it's murky, it's complicated, but this is certainly fine for black. The move knight b5 is more interesting. And this is a very curious point in this repertoire, because in every other situation I recommend to castle long. You can castle long here as well. The problem is, not really a problem, but I should show it. If you castle long here, the issue is that white, after this, has the additional idea to play the queen to c3 instead of c4. We had the same position with the queen on e2, and there only queen c4 has this mate threat on c7. Here, queen c3 is possible, however. And now the issue is that after c6, knight takes a7. The problem is that this is a draw. Yeah, we can go to c7, and now after taking, white can check, and that is the difference. Now this is a draw, unfortunately. That means castling long, it's not a mistake, but white can force a draw if he absolutely wants to. So if you are in this situation, in this position, and a draw is completely fantastic and will win you $1 million, you can castle long. White can force a draw and gift you the $1 million, let's say. But if you want to continue a fight against the king's gambit, you should play king to d8. And this is, I think, better for black. Still better for black, but it's obviously a less dynamic and a little bit more murky solution than the long castling that we have seen in other lines. So let's check this a little bit. We want to make sure that we're actually fine here. So white has two choices basically, to take on e6 and then play e5 or play e5 immediately. We start with e5, we can go to d5, and here a potential line, and it's difficult to analyze this till the end. A potential line could be h4, preventing g5, intending knight g5. Here we can take, play c6, and ultimately play knight b4, and I think black is fine here. I still would rather take black here, because the black king might look odd on d8, but ask the white king on f1 how he feels, or how it feels. It's not really a great king position either, and rather, I think, the more unreliable one, yeah, compared to the black king. Instead, white can also, after king d8, take on e6, which we of course recapture, and after e5, I suggest to take and play knight d5. Nitilius in his book also analyzes knight h5 and a6, but I couldn't really make them work in terms of an advantage, so I looked at this and I preferred that a little bit. But yeah, this is also worth checking out if you want to analyze a little bit for yourself. There's more than one way of playing here. That's what I'm trying to say. Here, for example, white can go c4, we attack the queen, put the king to c8, and after bishop f4, queen h5, I think black is fine. You can also play knight c5 in this position, as Nitilius analyzed, but queen h5, I think, I like better. This is also what the engine wants to play after a while. The general idea is to play knight c6. Yeah, look at this, secure the king, bishop e7, rook f1, and then try to play on the f file. I would rather be black, but it's not a huge advantage, but I think black is better. Yeah, that is the bishop's gambit. Yeah, it is murky, as it is typical for the king's gambit, but I think black is fine. The key thing is, remember the setup. As I mentioned, it is always the same setup, this kind of thing. Bishop here, knight here, queen returns to h6, and then you have to remember that after knight b5 you can castle long. There's just one position with the queen on d3. Yeah, so let me see if I can find this exactly here. If white goes knight b5, where castling long is allowing a draw if white wants, yeah? And king d8 is the way to keep a very complicated fight going. So that was the bishop's gambit. Now we have to go to the move knight f3, the traditional main move of the king's gambit. Here my recommended reply is the move knight to f6. That is the so-called Schalop defense. That's a German master player of the 19th century. The move knight f6 never had complete mainline status. That was probably the move g5. That was considered to be the main line. But I think knight f6 is an excellent choice for us. I have to say that, of course, I studied all the recently released books on e4, e5. Simply, as an e4, e5 player, you have to be up to date. And for this, of course, for this course, I checked them. And two books that I used in preparation, the already mentioned book by Nitilius, and also a book on e4, e5 by Swedish, I think he's in IM now, Martin Lokander. They both recommended knight f6, the Schalop defense. And I looked at their analysis and looked at the lines, I analyzed myself, and I have to say it is just so excellent for black that I cannot recommend anything else. Yeah, it's just amazing, I think, how good this line is. I'm really quite enthusiastic there, because I think white has a very hard time to keep the balance, if possible at all. I'm not sure that it is possible. I didn't find equality, at least. And it's also great because it is not a super heavy theoretical burden to learn it, if you compare it to the move g5 in particular. So let's have a look. What is white supposed to play? The most common move is the move e5, attacking the knight. But white can also cover e4, it is attacked after all, or can play a gambit with bishop c4. We can start with the gambit, bishop c4. After bishop c4, I recommend to take the pawn, which is not a surprise. I always recommend to take the pawn if this is possible, and here it definitely is possible. After queen e2, my recommendation, however, is to now play d5, return a pawn. After the capture, knight c3, we can drop back to e6, and here we are in excellent shape. We have gained the bishop pair, and we have, I think made sure that white has no attack going. I think black is in very good shape. I mean, we currently are pawn up still. We have to, we should not forget that. White has to get the pawn back at first. So bishop c4 is a very weird, actually, gambit. So what about covering moves? The move d3 looks passive and cannot really endanger our position. We go d5, e5, and knight h5. This is the knight position that is typical of the shallop defense. The knight is covering this pawn and makes it difficult for white also to play moves like h4, which are common to attack a later g5 move. Here we have basically a better version of a main line that we see later. After bishop e2, we are happy to push g5. Important is we usually only play g5 in this opening line after the center has been closed, like it happened here. d3 is not really a move that scares us very much, and you can easily see why if we look at the main lines, what we will do in a couple of minutes. A serious move is knight c3. That is certainly making some sense. Just cover the pawn. Our reply is fairly clear. We play d5. Whenever possible, play d5 in the open games is a common rule. Here white can play again e5 or can take e5. We happily go to h5, cover this, and after d4 I suggest to play knight c6, simply developing. I believe that those closed center positions are really excellent for black. White has some problems there. I noticed that it's getting a little bit dark. Just a second. That was not a bomb explosion, but rather the lights. Maybe I should have flicked them on before I started the recording, but I didn't quite know how long it would take. So, what happens here? White has tried a couple of moves here, but all in all very unsuccessfully. The trickiest one is g3 that we will look at the end. But what white has tried is bishop b5 and bishop e2. Just let's look at this a little bit. If white goes bishop b5, I recommend to play the move a6. Here is an important moment after bishop b5. You should not play the move g5. This is very important. Sorry, g5, because white has the very annoying move e6. That is problematic because after bishop takes, knight e5, this is coming with a tempo, and here there's also something happening. I would definitely avoid that, but a6 is strong. After a6, white can drop back to a4 or take. If he goes back, I recommend to play bishop e6 and go g5 later. Just prevent him from pushing e6 in reply to g5. If white takes, however, we can easily play g5. There is no e6 idea anymore that can trouble us. Here black is just a lot better. I mean, we are pawn up and white has no particular counterplay. What is exactly is white's compensation? Here we have easy moves, knight, bishops here, and the knight will often come back like that. This is bishop b5. White can also try bishop e2, and here again we can play g5. This is a tactically complicated move, however, because white could try to take on g5. This is the only critical move that we have to check. Takes, takes. White grabs the knight, and we check on h4. It's important that this is not a good idea, because after the bishop moved back and knight d5, black has problems, to put it mildly. If you check, however, you have an excellent position. King f1, bishop e6, and black just attacks the weak white king and will castle quickly next, while the white king is simply, insecure. It's just a badly placed king. In this line here, the move g3 is yet untested, but that is something that should be checked. It's important that we should not take on g3, as knight g5 leads to very crazy complications that are not bad for white. However, after g5 we are in very good shape. We only have to look at one or two important points. If white now plays the move bishop b5 and we play g4, we should note that after this we should not play f3 but bishop e7. After f3, white has a dangerous sacrifice. At the end, this and this is hanging. We should instead play the move bishop e7. And now black is winning is strong, but it's very close. It's very close. We are now threatening to take here twice, and if the knight goes back, we get the pawn to f3. And black is a pawn up for his fantastic position. This is just important to remember, that you should not play f3 prematurely. You have to play bishop e7 first. Instead, white can also take on f4, after which we play g4. Important idea. Knight g5, h6. At first you think, okay, black just wins the piece, right? But white has knight h3. It's a typically wacky king's gambit position. Black, in fact, is in fantastic shape here. If you remember the next move, rook g8. This is actually tricky to understand. What is that move doing? That move actually now attacks the knight, because we are threatening to take it. As queen h5, bishop g4 loses the queen. For example, if white plays something like that, we simply take this, because now the queen is trapped. Very nice. After rook g8, the only move is knight f2, and then after g3 we have a strong attack. For example, after the capture, at the end we play this, we play queen d7, we play long castles. And what exactly is white's position all about with the king on f1? Black is a lot better, really. This whole line looks entirely unpromising. Bishop e2 here is a little bit more interesting, but also good for black. We play knight c6. This is a bit transpositional, of course. If white goes d4, g5, something that we have seen already. Castles, g5. If this is closed, we can play with g5. Here we see a different way of white failing with knight takes g5. It's just important to know why it fails and see the ideas. We have a big counter-attack. Rook g8, a counter-attack. Oh, white doesn't have an attack, but we quickly get our pieces out and get an attack going. Here white is already unable to keep the exchange. What can you... You have no rook move to play. I mean, white is also facing this idea. So d4, takes, and now an important move, bishop h6. This is stronger. The idea is that after bishop f4 we have move queen f5. We will take this next. After white takes on d5 here, we castle long, and black has a winning attack. a very common scenario. Oftentimes black is the one with the winning attack, as this king is just so open. From here, white can also take on d5 first, after which you have to remember that long castling is key. Bishop f4, queen f5 is a position that we just had looked at a couple of seconds ago. This g5 move is always interesting and strong if white has closed the center with e5. If white is not closing the center, this is oftentimes just too risky. And we will see later that then g6 is the better solution. Here we have to look at ed5 though. That is a very natural move. White just takes, we recapture, and now white can play bishop c4 or knight takes d5. So let's have a look. If white plays bishop c4, we take on c3, and here the only interesting move is to take with the d pawn, d takes c3. After b takes, we play bishop d6, and we are just better here for nothing. We have a pawn on f4 that is a hindrance for white, and white has no compensation. He can try to play a little bit here for the development, but a position like that is just insufficient. You don't get the pawn back, and what is the compensation there? B takes c3 is not a way to pose any problems. D takes is a lot stronger, and here after the capture and bishop d6, rook e1, king f8, here we see that black has kept a pawn, and with the pawn structure here a little bit devalued, we would be a lot better if white wouldn't have that development lead. With the lead in development, white can pose some serious problems. However, if we know what we're doing, the position is also good for black. Let's look at this. The only way to make any sort of trouble, let's say, is knight e5, immediately attacking on f7. But what happens now is a very long line, but it is always also very forcing. We take this, f6, and now the only way to pose any problems is rook c5. White has to play tempo moves, moves that attack something. If he plays anything slow, we just play g5, bishop g4 with check, and we keep our pawn for absolutely nothing. So rook c5, c6, bishop f4. Wait, haven't we just given back the pawn and are in trouble? No. After b6, this rook is trapped. That's a funny situation. White does not have rook h5. We should briefly check this because there is a check, of course. So we trap the rook. Are we winning? No, we are not. White, in fact, has a funny response that we will check a couple of seconds. Bishop takes b8. We should check. That is not enough. Here we are up the exchange. White has a pawn, however, and has pretty strong bishops. White has some chances to defend this, but it is not really fun. If anybody is better and can win, it's of course black. A bit more interesting in this position where the rook is seemingly trapped is the move rook d5, a very nice resource, pointing at the fact that this rook is in the corner and unprotected. So if we take it, and we should take it, we cannot just save the rook so easily. However, black, I think, is better with the right continuation. We go g5, attacking the rook, attacking the bishop. And now white should not blunder with this check, as at the end of the line we are pinning this bishop, and black wins easily, being a piece up. Instead, white should, after g5, drop back to e3. We play knight c6. We don't want to give away a rook if we can just give away a knight. That's a more promising way to give back material. We check. And rook d6. A very long line, I know. Bishop b5, bishop d7, bishop back, bishop c6. Now we attack the g-pawn, g3 and h5 at the end, with h4 to activate the rook. In this whole long line, black is an exchange up for a pawn, And the only real question is, are we able to convert this into win, or is white putting up enough resistance to draw? So we are in a very comfortable situation. If anybody wins, it will be black in this whole line with bishop c4 takes, d takes. But it's important to know those tricks, yeah, with the trapped rook that is not quite trapped and so on. It's not easy to find that over the board. That was bishop c4. White can also take, after which we of course recapture. And now white has tried d4 and c4. c4 is pretty awkward, as after queen a5, white is not even managing to play the d-pawn. That looks really weird. So white usually tries to move d4 first, after which I recommend to play bishop e7. Simply prepare, in some cases, to castle short, or prepare to play g5 at the right moment. Currently, the f-pawn is not hanging. That is a big blunder. So white usually plays the move c4. Now the queen is attacked and has to make a decision where to go to. And ultimately, the queen, I think, should go to d6. There is long analysis in recent books that I mentioned about queen e4 check, but I think the move queen d6 is better. It keeps the pawn covered and is flexible. If white goes c5, the queen goes to h6. And I just don't see any compensation here. This is an annoying pawn, also because it makes it difficult to get some scope for this bishop. If white goes g3, we go g5, and I think black is just hugely better. In this position, I'm sorry, that was too quick. In this position, white also has tried to move bishop d3, after which again I recommend g5. I just don't see white's compensation. White is a pawn down for, I think, nothing. Black's easy idea is to play a quick knight c6, bishop out, castle queenside. Queenside, we will have a good king position and we are a pawn up, and those pawns do control squares. I found a relatively recent game from 2017 that went with queen d2. Interesting, trying to attack the pawn. It was played in the game between Johnny Hector and Axel Smith. And here Smith played c5. However, I think after the more materialistic approach, g5, again, I don't see what white has. Yeah, I think black is just a lot better. We are pawn up and white has, I think, zero compensation. Yeah, this is simply a bad line. What can you say about it? Yeah. So we have to check ultimately. Well, so we checked knight c3, d5, we checked e5, and we checked ed5. So at the end, it's all about e5 that we have to look at as a final thing. So we go to h5, not a surprise. And now, again, white has tried a couple of moves. The move that has been recommended in the most influential King's Gambit book of recent years, maybe of all time, by John Shaw. It's a couple of years old now, 2015, I think. Is bishop e2. That is what Shaw recommended, and it's supposed to be the best move. We will see that this is also good for black, but we can try to, we should check the other moves first. White has tried also d4. I recommend to play d6 to attack the center pawns. You can play d5, that's not terrible, but attacking the center here is also quite attractive. Yeah, here white has tried the moves queen e2 and bishop c4 against queen e2, simply intending to take. Against queen e2, it is very important that you keep in mind that this queen might have a check on b5. So please don't play this move. After the capture, there is the check and we lose this knight. Ouch. Yeah, queen e2 is a bit trappy. It's absolutely no problem if you remember that d5 is a good move. It looks odd, one move, two moves, but it is still good because the queen is so completely misplaced. White has tried the move c4 here, but after taking and c6, black is excellent here. Here we have tempo moves and we have good squares available for our pieces. So this is not a problem at all. Queen e2 has trick value, so remember this idea with queen b5. Against, in this position, bishop c4 is also possible, but after knight c6, castles g6, we get positions that are quite similar to the main line, and the bishop is not better on c4. We have no problem here whatsoever, and it's very uncommon actually, so it's not really worth analyzing in any detail. You will be okay with normal moves that are typical for this line. So that was d4. White can try bishop c4 here, after which we go d5, tempo on the bishop, and this is just excellent. Yeah, we keep this. It's covered 2 times by now, and white has no extra development or any sort of compensation that you can imagine. White has tried this move, immediately queen e2, and again you have to keep this queen b5 idea in mind. I recommend to play bishop to e7. We want to prepare to castle, d4, and now please don't go d6. We have seen that already. Take, and we lose our knight on h5. We can, however, castle. So what was the whole point of this odd queen e2 d4 idea? And I included this mostly because white has one idea that looks completely wacky, but it is quite interesting. That is the move g4. Yeah, here we have to take en passant. We have no other square for the knight, so we take. And now queen g2. It looks extremely wild, but it's the king's gambit, yeah? So here we have to be precise. Now we cannot just, let's say, take on h2. That is just giving white far too much. But we are fine with the move d6. Initiate queenside development. If white takes on g3 now, and I don't really see what else, we go bishop g4. And you only have to remember one point here that is possible to miss, that after knight h2, we have the move knight takes g3. Yeah, very important. Queen takes g3, bishop h4 loses the queen. And after knight takes g4, we take on h1, take on e5. And after we have survived this onslaught, yeah, we are winning. Yeah, it's really this g4 move that can really hit you hard if you have not seen it before. Instead of g4, white can also try to simply develop, but that doesn't pose many problems. Now we can go d6, there is no check on b5 anymore. And after this, we catch up in development, and actually we are better developed, as the queen on e2 is clogging up things quite a bit. Again, murky, but black must be better. We are a pawn up, and I don't see what white has. So this is all very, very nice. If we go all the way back, we have to ultimately check the move bishop e2. That is the move that was recommended in the book by John Shaw. So d6, we attack the center, and here castles is the main continuation. It's important to know that, again, this is easy, but that castles, which looks, that d4, it looks kind of normal, is not great, as we can simply take. Yeah, that is better than a developing move, because now white has no good reply. Knight takes, queen h4, yeah, has to be answered now with a king move, and that has to be fantastic. And yeah, so yeah, white is in quite some trouble after d takes e5, because that means you cannot capture with the knight, and what else is there? Yeah. So the main thing and only thing that is interesting is castles. after which we develop d4, and here we go g6. Note that g5 is not good because the center is not closed. This is not some abstract problem, but a very concrete one. White has to move d5. And after knight takes, pawn takes, our brave knight is gone. Just go g6. g6 prepares to fianchetto the bishop and increase the pressure on the center. Knight c3, bishop g7, and white has huge problems to keep this. I think he cannot. And in fact, Shaw gives this line. Takes, d5, knight e5, and knight d2. And it's quite weird, because in the book, and I looked it up, I mean, I saw this quoted in Matilda's book, and I looked it up in the original book by Shaw. He says that, unfortunately, I cannot show any advantage for white, but we will get the pawn back and are okay. That is a weird statement, because, I mean, even if you just, cursory, we just look at this briefly, the initial assessment must be that white is in terrible shape. I mean, even if you just drop it back to f6 this knight, black is better. There's absolutely no question. In the Natilda's book, he quotes a game, correspondence game, Marchisotti-Lukasova, where black was better and won in a very nice strategic fashion. I mean, for example, after this, and you castle him, black has a fantastically great Sicilian structure. I know it sounds odd, that this should be a Sicilian structure, but this is very similar to Sicilians, where after black has played e5, for example, in the Najdorf, you have taken on f4, and later you take a piece on d5, after which the e-pawn takes. This is a fantastic version of that. Black has great pieces, great dark square control, and I mean, what the heck is that? I mean, white's pieces are terrible. So this is already good for black without any big arguing. And when I looked at this, I initially intended to recommend that, but then I saw that the engine even likes castles, and this is a fantastic alternative. You have a really great choice there. You can just go back to f6 and be better, or you can play that, which is far more dynamic, but also very strong. It's difficult now to suggest anything else than taking, so white should take this probably. We take. Now you cannot grab the pawn, that blunders the queen, it has no square. So white should instead take on f4, and now I suggest to play bishop g4. This is a much sharper, of course, alternative to play compared to dropping the knight back to f6. Here, black is playing in a dynamic way, but is in fantastic shape. I mean, active. And what is that? Those pieces don't do anything. Black is a lot better here, quite obviously, and you have a great choice there. You can play in a dynamic way like that, or you can go back to f6 and just be in good shape, as already recommended by Natilda's in his book. That is the Scallop defense against the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit is a tricky opening. It's very aggressive, but if you have the right attitude, that you have to go with this flow, with this aggressive tactical play, you will be in good shape, because objectively speaking, black is better in this gambit. A little bit if white plays perfectly, and oftentimes even more than a little bit if white makes mistakes. The King's Gambit is nothing really to be super afraid of, as we have seen, because the theoretical workload is not super high. The Scallop is relatively easy to learn, and the Bishop's Gambit is complicated, but the setup, I mean, this is more of a setup thing than anything else. As we have seen, the setup is quite easy to remember, I think. Still, I want to emphasize, those gambits, they happen, they will be played against you, in particular in Blitz and Rapid. This is oftentimes people play those loose openings in Blitz, and if you know a little bit more than general things that I just mentioned, it can give you many good and easy points. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and yeah, we will continue in the second video with other deviations on move 2, but those a little bit less aggressive ones. Thanks a lot for watching.